The sound of splintering wood isn't how a man expects to start his morning. But that's what I heard, sharp, sudden, and final. My gate groaned like an old soldier taking its last stand before snapping clean in two. Dust hung in the cold dawn air, glinting in the early sun. And there she was, Karen. Perfectly pressed blazer, oversized sunglasses, one hand on the wheel of her spotless white SUV. She didn't wave, didn't stop. She just pressed the gas and tore across my land like she owned it. Gravel spit against her tires. The smell of exhaust mixed with cedar dust. My horses reared in their paddocks, snorting at the racket. By the time I reached the porch, she was already halfway across the pasture, disappearing behind the hill that led toward Pine Hollow, the HOA subdivision next door. I just stood there in my boots, jaw tight, coffee cooling in my hand. Nobody could be that bold, right? Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe her GPS went haywire. I told myself that just to calm the storm rising in my chest. But deep down, I already knew people like her don't make mistakes. They make statements. That gate wasn't just wooden hinges. It was my boundary, my peace. The line that said, "This land is mine." And she'd crushed it like it meant nothing. When I bought the ranch, I imagined peace, open skies, cattle lowing at dawn, the steady rhythm of a gate swinging shut each night. After 30 years of construction sites and city noise, I wanted quiet. I'd spent half my life being told what to do by homeowners associations, landlords, and foremen. This land was supposed to be my fresh start, 30 acres of my own rules. My own space, my own sunrise. My property line sat right up against Pine Hollow, one of those picture-perfect HOA neighborhoods where every mailbox matched. Every lawn looked vacuumed, and every neighbor smiled a little too hard. My ranch wasn't part of it. The county confirmed it. The HOA had no jurisdiction here. But that didn't stop their president, Karen, from acting like she ran the county itself. The first time she showed up, she smiled like a realtor. Blonde bob, manicured hands resting on her car door, her voice sweet as syrup. "Lovely place you've got here," she said. "Thank you," I replied, thinking that was that. Then, without another word, she drove straight through my closed gate. The hinges screamed. Wood cracked. And I stood there, half in disbelief, half choking on dust, watching her bumper disappear into the distance. That night I rebuilt the gate, stronger hinges, deeper posts. Told myself it was just a misunderstanding. Everybody deserves one mistake. A week later, she did it again. No hesitation this time, no smile. Just a flash of sunlight on glass before the crunch echoed through the morning air. I ran out, waving my arms. "Hey, that's private property!" She leaned out her window with a smirk. "Community easement," she shouted. My blood boiled. I knew my deed backwards and forwards. There was no easement, no shared road, no public right-of-way. But she said it like scripture. That night I reinforced the posts again, muttering under my breath. Community easement, my foot. 2 days later, I found an envelope tucked into my mailbox. Official Pine Hollow HOA letterhead. "Dear resident," it read, "you are in violation of HOA standards for maintaining unsightly structures. Please remove your gate immediately or face fines." I laughed out loud. I wasn't even part of their HOA. Still, the message was clear. Karen wasn't just trespassing. She was testing how far she could push. Down at the feed store, a couple of old-timers shook their heads when I mentioned her. "You've got Karen problems," one said, spitting sunflower seeds into a cup. "Afraid so," I replied. "Good luck with that." "She runs that HOA like it's the White House." "Yup," the other added. "Folks have been fighting her for years. She'll bleed you dry in paperwork if you ain't careful." I didn't like that advice. Let her be. Not on my land. By the third time she smashed through, it wasn't about cedar or hinges anymore. It was about principle. I was stacking firewood near the barn when I heard the familiar growl of her SUV. She revved at the base of the hill, eyes locked on me through the windshield. "You really ought to keep this open," she said when I stepped in front of her. "This is private property," I shot back. "Don't be so selfish," she snapped. "This road saves me 10 minutes every morning. It's community spirit." I laughed, though nothing about it was funny. "Lady, that's trespassing." Her smirk tightened. "You're new here." Maybe you don't understand. HOA sets the rules. I'm not in your HOA, I said. You're within the community, she declared, then pressed the gas. The gate splintered behind me as dust clouded my boots. That night, as I hammered in new posts, the anger in my chest hardened into something else. Resolve. Every splinter was an insult. Every broken hinge a dare. A week later, the dare turned public. 3 HOA vehicles followed her lead, one after another through my gate like it was a parade. They waved as they passed me like I was the hired help. That evening, I found another letter. Violation notice. Obstruction of community access road. They threatened fines, legal action, and possible forfeiture of easement privileges. Forfeiture of what? They were inventing laws out of thin air. I drove down to the county clerk's office. The records were clear. My land was deeded separately. No HOA authority, no easement. I had every right to block that road, but logic doesn't work on people who think power equals truth. Soon, the harassment started. HOA inspectors with clipboards pacing my fence line, taking photos, pretending to log violations. A couple of them shouted that I'd hear from the board. Then one evening, while fixing a fence post, a wiry man strutted up, clipboard in hand. "You can't keep rebuilding that gate," he said. "HOA voted. Road stays open," I laughed. "Funny, I didn't vote in your HOA." He scribbled something down. "Failure to comply will result in penalties. You'll need more than a clipboard to scare me, friend," I said. He frowned. "Karen will handle you." And handle me she did. One night around midnight, I woke to the unmistakable crack of wood snapping. My dogs barked. I grabbed a flashlight and ran to the drive. The gate lay in ruins again, hinges twisted, posts broken clean. Red tail lights vanished into the darkness. No words, no notes, just the wreckage left behind. I stood there, fists clenched, the beam of my flashlight trembling. My land felt smaller that night. Invaded, violated. At dawn, I rebuilt again. This time slower, methodical, thinking not about the wood, but about the woman behind the wheel. Karen thought she was untouchable, but everyone has limits. And that night, mine snapped along with that gate. The next day, I tried once more to go through the proper channels. The sheriff listened, chewing on a toothpick. "Without proof," he said, "it's your word against theirs. Karen's got friends downtown, so that was that. No law, no help, no justice." Driving home, I stared at the road she'd carved through my property. Tire ruts, dust-broken wood. My peace ripped apart. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. If the law wouldn't protect me, I'd protect myself that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a pad of paper, sketching ideas by lantern light. Every gate I'd built before had failed. Not because it wasn't strong, but because it wasn't final. I wasn't thinking revenge. I was thinking boundaries. Boundaries that couldn't be ignored, pushed, or smashed for convenience. The seed of an idea took root. A gate she couldn't drive through. A gate she wouldn't want to. I looked out the window at the empty drive, the posts still leaning from her last assault. The moonlight caught the jagged edges of the broken boards. "Next time," I whispered, "we'll see who laughs." That was the night the trespassing stopped being an inconvenience and became a mission, because when someone keeps breaking through what's yours, there comes a point where you stop repairing. You start reinforcing, and by the time Karen came barreling down that hill again, she had no idea what was waiting for her on the other side of that gate. The morning after Karen's midnight stunt, I didn't rebuild the gate right away. I stood at the edge of my driveway, staring at the wreckage, splintered wood, twisted hinges, gravel torn up like a battlefield. The smell of oil still hung in the air from her tires. For weeks, she'd been laughing at me from behind the wheel, certain I wouldn't fight back. But standing there, I realized something. Karen wasn't my problem anymore. The gate was. It wasn't strong enough, and neither was I until that moment. When you've built houses for 30 years, you learn that every structure has a weak point. But you also learn how to fix it. And I wasn't about to let one HOA president with a superiority complex teach me that lesson again. So I started planning. That afternoon, I drove into town and picked up what I needed. Steel beams, rebar, concrete mix, a few welding rods. Nothing that would make anyone look twice. To the folks at the hardware store, I was just fixing another fence. But in my head, I was drawing up blueprints for justice. By the time I got home, the sun was setting, painting the fields in gold. I parked by the barn, unloaded the supplies, and stood where the old gate used to be. The ground was rutted with tire tracks, deep grooves carved by entitlement. I kicked the dirt, took a deep breath, and got to work. I started by digging new post holes, this time deeper, nearly 6 feet down. I mixed concrete by hand, my shoulders aching but my resolve steady. Each pour felt like sealing a promise. Once the foundation set, I bolted in the steel posts. Not the flimsy kind you buy for fences, but heavy industrial-grade beams I'd salvaged from a construction job years back. They'd been collecting dust in my barn, waiting for a purpose. This was it. The gate I was building now wouldn't just stop a car. It would stop the whole mindset that thought rules were optional. For days, I worked from sunrise to sunset. Sweat burned in my eyes. Sparks flew from the welder, lighting up the dusk like fireflies. My dogs lay nearby, heads resting on their paws, watching quietly as if they understood their owner was preparing for something big. Neighbors drove by on the county road, slowing down to stare. A few called out, "You fixing that gate again?" "Not fixing," I'd reply without looking up. "Reinforcing." They'd chuckle nervously and keep driving. "Round here you learn not to ask too many questions when a man's at war with an HOA. By the end of the 3rd day, the skeleton stood tall, a wall of steel wrapped in cedar planks designed to look just like the old gate. From a distance, it was the same rustic wooden frame Karen had smashed a dozen times before. But inside, it was a fortress. Every weld was triple-layered, every hinge reinforced with rebar pins and torque bolts. Even the latch mechanism was anchored into a concrete footing 2 feet deep. If Karen thought she could ram through this, she was in for a rude awakening, but I wasn't finished yet. Stopping her car wasn't enough. I needed to make sure the shortcut ended, permanently, so I added one last feature. Behind the gate, I dug a shallow trench, no deeper than a foot, but I lined it with concrete and installed a grid of flat steel spikes, angled backward, hidden under a thin layer of gravel. It wasn't a trap meant to hurt anyone, just a way to make sure any vehicle that crossed that line would leave with 4 flat tires and a bruised ego. I remember standing there, staring at my handiwork as the sun dipped behind the horizon. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I'd finally reclaimed my peace. The trap wasn't about Karen, it was about closure. 3 days later, word must have spread. I was out by the barn, tightening the last bolts, when I saw a familiar white SUV idling at the edge of my property. Karen's tinted window rolled down, her phone glinting in the sunlight. She was recording. I kept working, pretending not to notice. Finally, she called out, "You really think you can stop progress with a pile of wood?" I didn't even glance up. "Not trying to stop progress," I said, my voice steady. "Just stopping you." She laughed, a brittle, fake laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "The board's voting to remove that thing permanently, tomorrow." I shrugged. "Good luck." Sparks flew from my welder as I sealed the final seam. Her laughter faded as she pressed the gas and drove off, spraying gravel behind her like a retreating army. That night, my old friend Hank stopped by. He'd been a rancher longer than I'd been alive, broad-shouldered, weathered hands, eyes that had seen a few too many fights with nature and neighbors alike. He leaned against the fence, chewing a toothpick, watching me test the gate's swing. "You're playing with fire," he said finally. "I know. She's not going to take this lying down. I'm counting on it," he chuckled, shaking his head. "You got a mean streak, you know that?" "Not mean," I said. "Just tired of being pushed," he smiled. "Then you'd better build it right." I already did. We both looked at the gate, solid, silent, immovable. By the 5th day, the project was done. To the untrained eye, it looked exactly like the old one. Same cedar finish, same rustic hardware, even the same swing creak. But behind that disguise was a tank. I painted the posts to match the surrounding fence, covered the concrete with fresh gravel, and wiped the sweat from my brow. The air smelled like iron and cedar, a mix of labor and satisfaction. I sat on the porch that night, dogs at my feet, listening to the crickets hum in the field. The gate stood tall under the moonlight, casting long shadows across the drive. For weeks, Karen had treated my land like her shortcut. But now she'd learned that some gates aren't meant to open. I took a slow sip of coffee and whispered, "Come on, Karen, I'm ready." It didn't take long. Saturday afternoon, the peace broke again. The low, throaty growl of an engine echoed through the hills, familiar, deliberate. My heart beat faster. I set my mug down and stepped onto the porch. Through the shimmer of heat rising from the road, I saw it, Karen's SUV. Behind her, 2 more cars followed, one a maroon minivan, the other a silver sedan, her little HOA convoy. They slowed for a moment at the top of the hill. I could almost feel her confidence from here. Then, just like before, she floored it. Gravel sprayed. The SUV roared. I didn't move, just folded my arms and watched. The distance closed fast, 50 yards, 30, 10. Then came the sound, metal against metal, like a hammer hitting an anvil. The SUV jolted violently, stopping dead in its tracks. The front end crumpled like paper. Airbags exploded in a puff of white. The convoy behind her slammed on their brakes, one swerving into a ditch, the other barely stopping in time. Dust filled the air, and then came the pop, pop, pop of tires deflating as the spikes did their work. For a moment, the world went silent. Then came the shouting. Karen stumbled out of her SUV, coughing through airbag dust, eyes wide with disbelief. "What have you done?" she screamed, voice cracking. I stayed on my porch, calm as a man can be. "I built a gate. This is illegal." "You could have hurt someone," she shrieked. "Didn't hurt anyone," I said. "Just stopped some trespassers." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You'll pay for this. The HOA will bury you." "Maybe," I said, pulling a small device from my pocket. "But they'll have to do it on camera." I gestured toward the posts. Tiny red lights blinked faintly in the daylight, security cameras, motion-triggered and recording everything. Karen's face went pale. Neighbors had started gathering along the road, drawn by the noise. Phones came out recording. One man laughed. "Looks like the Queen's lost her crown." Karen spun on him, shouting, "Stop recording! This is private." Another voice called out, "Not anymore, Karen." Laughter rippled through the crowd. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later, lights flashing, dust swirling. He stepped out, looked at the wreckage, and sighed. "What in the blazes happened here?" Karen marched up to him like she was in charge. "He set a trap. He sabotaged the road. He could have killed us." The sheriff turned to me. "That true?" I shook my head. "Private property, Sheriff. Reinforced gate, visible, clearly marked. They drove through it, again. Cameras caught everything." He looked over the posts, spotted the cameras, then back at her. "Mom, you've been warned about this before, haven't you?" She sputtered. "This is community access." He shook his head. "Not according to the county line." "You're trespassing." The crowd cheered. Karen's face turned crimson. I walked over slowly, boots crunching on gravel. The sun was hot, the air thick with tension. I tapped the hood of her crumpled SUV and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Shortcuts closed, Karen." Laughter and applause broke out. Her jaw trembled. "This isn't over," she hissed. I smiled. "You're right. It's just getting started." The sheriff called a tow truck while Karen stood frozen beside her ruined car, the Queen of Pine Hollow dethroned. As the convoy was hauled away, I returned to my porch. My dogs wagged their tails, sensing my calm. I looked out over the field, the gate still standing proud. Not a single dent. For the first time in months, the air felt clear, but deep down, I knew Karen wasn't finished. People like her never stop after losing. They regroup, they scheme. And sure enough, a week later, the next battle began. The sheriff's tow truck rumbled off into the distance, hauling away Karen's crumpled SUV. When the sound finally faded, I stood alone at the edge of the gravel drive, breathing in the smell of hot metal and dust. The gate stood tall behind me, unmarked. For the first time since I'd moved out here, the ranch was silent again. I should have felt at peace, but with people like Karen, silence doesn't mean surrender. It means regrouping. 3 mornings later, I found an envelope in my mailbox, thick and official-looking. Inside was a stack of papers stamped with seals and legal jargon. The Pine Hollow Homeowners Association was suing me for reckless endangerment, property damage, and obstruction of community easement. They demanded I remove the gate, pay for Karen's vehicle repairs, and compensate the board for emotional distress. I laughed so hard my coffee spilled across the porch railing. Then I sat down and read it again. The audacity almost impressed me. Still, I wasn't stupid. Karen might have lost on the road, but she was moving the fight to a place she thought I couldn't follow, the courtroom. That afternoon, I drove into town and walked straight into the office of a local attorney named Martha Kent, small woman. Sharp eyes, the kind of lawyer who didn't waste words. She read through the papers without saying a thing, then leaned back in her chair. Classic HOA overreach, she said finally. They don't have jurisdiction over your land, and they know it. But they're hoping you'll fold under pressure. Folding isn't in my vocabulary, I told her. She smiled. Good, because this is going to be fun. Within a week, Martha filed a countersuit, trespassing, property destruction, harassment, and attempted fraud through false fines. She attached copies of the video footage from my security cameras, clear as daylight, every angle covered. When Karen realized I wasn't backing down, she did what she always did. She doubled down. 2 days before the hearing, I came home to find a small crowd of HOA board members gathered outside my gate, clipboards in hand. This man is dangerous, one shouted. He set a trap that could have killed children. Another added. Karen stood in the middle of them, red-faced, waving papers like a battle flag. We cannot allow one stubborn man to endanger our community. She shouted for the phones recording nearby, but this time the crowd wasn't with her. Neighbors lined the main road, whispering, shaking their heads, some even laughing. Everyone had seen the footage online. My cameras, the sheriff's report, and now the viral clip titled HOA Karen versus the Gate of Justice. I stepped out onto my porch and raised my voice. You all want the truth? Watch the video. Every time she smashed that gate, every fake fine, every trespass, it's all on tape. Someone in the crowd yelled, We're tired of the HOA bullying us. Another voice followed, Let the man live in peace. Karen's lips trembled, but she kept shouting, calling everything lies. The more she screamed, the quieter her supporters grew. The courtroom was packed the day of the hearing. Karen swept in wearing a bright red suit, her hair styled to perfection, flanked by 2 nervous-looking board members. Her lawyer, a slick man with polished shoes, stacked folders on the table like ammunition. When the judge called the case, Karen's attorney launched into a dramatic speech about public safety and reckless behavior. He painted me as a recluse, obsessed with imaginary property rights. Then Martha stood calm, steady, precise. Your Honor, she said, the evidence will show that my client's property lies outside of Pine Hollow HOA jurisdiction. Every letter, every fine, every claim from the association was fraudulent. And as for endangerment, she paused, pressing play on a small remote, the only danger here was caused by the reckless trespassing of the HOA president. The monitors flickered to life. There it was, in high definition. Karen's SUV speeding down the hill, crashing into the gate, airbags bursting, the convoy piling up behind her. The courtroom gasped. Then came earlier clips, every time she rammed through, every fake citation she issued, every smug grin as she shouted, "Community easement." When the last frame froze, Martha turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I rest my case. Karen took the stand next. Her confidence cracked almost immediately. She raised her voice, shouting about community access, about my authority as HOA president. When Martha asked, do you acknowledge the defendant's land lies outside HOA boundaries? Karen snapped, I decide what's within the community. The judge slammed his gavel. This is a court of law, not your board meeting. Sit down. Her shoulders sagged. For the first time, I saw it, the moment she realized her power didn't extend beyond Pine Hollow's gates. The verdict came swift and sharp. The court dismissed all of the HOA's claims. Instead, they ordered the association to pay damages for trespassing and property destruction. Karen herself was fined personally for harassment and reckless driving. As the judge read the ruling, a ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom. Martha shot me a small grin. I just nodded. It wasn't about money, it was about principle. Within a week, the story spread like wildfire. Clips from the trial hit social media. Memes popped up overnight. You shall not pass, HOA edition. One video looped the exact moment her SUV stopped cold against the steel gate. Set to dramatic orchestra music, Pine Hollow's residents, once afraid to speak out, started sharing their own stories. Fines for flower colors, threats over mailbox heights, complaints about lawn ornaments. For years, Karen had ruled with paperwork and intimidation. Now she was a joke. By the end of the month, half the HOA board had resigned. The other half stopped answering calls. Pine Hollow's newsletters went from full of rules to blank pages. Karen herself? She vanished from public view. I'd see her sometimes through my binoculars, standing at her window, watching the road she used to claim. But she never crossed it again, one quiet morning. About a month later, another certified letter arrived. This. One from Karen personally. She wrote about moving forward, healing, divisions, and rebuilding. Community trust. She offered a settlement if I agreed to remove the gate and allow limited community passage. I read the letter twice, smiled, and typed a 2-sentence reply. There is no community easement. I own the road, and I have the deed to prove it. Because here's the twist. While Karen had been filing fake fines and shouting about community rights, I'd gone back through county records. And not only was my ranch outside HOA control, but the little gravel road she loved so much. It wasn't public at all. It was deeded to me, paid for in full years ago. Every inch of it. All this time, she hadn't been defending community property. She'd been trespassing on mine. When she received my response, the meltdown was immediate. That afternoon, she stormed onto my property one last time, waving the letter like a white flag she couldn't bring herself to raise. "This is fraud," she screamed. "You can't own that road. It's for the community." I leaned on my porch railing. "Check the county records, Karen. Clerk's office has the documents. Been in my name since day one." Her face went slack. Her words stumbled out in fragments. That's impossible." "No," I said quietly. "What's impossible is you thinking you could bully everyone forever." Neighbors had gathered again, phones in hand, recording every second. When Karen realized she was surrounded by witnesses, her expression shifted from anger to something almost human. Embarrassment. She turned on her heel, stomped once into the dirt, and marched away without another word. That was the last time she ever stepped foot on my land. After that day, the ranch finally became what I'd always wanted, a place of peace. The air felt lighter. The only sounds were wind through the grass and the creak of my porch chair as I sipped my coffee. No engines, no shouting, no letters in the mailbox. Sometimes I'd walk down to the gate just to run my hand along the steel. The wood planks had weathered a bit, but the frame stood firm. It wasn't just a barrier anymore. It was a reminder, because this whole thing from the first splinter to the courtroom was never really about Karen. It was about boundaries, the ones we build to protect our space, our dignity, and our peace of mind. People like Karen will always exist. Folks who think rules don't apply to them, who push past your no like it's a suggestion. They'll test your patience. They'll chip away at your limits until you either give in or you build something strong enough to stop them. I built, and that gate still stands, quiet and unmovable, guarding more than land. It guards the lesson I learned, that respect isn't something you demand, it's something you enforce by standing your ground. So let me ask you this. What's the gate in your life that you need to protect? Your time? Your peace? Your self-respect? Whatever it is, reinforce it. Don't apologize for it. Because once you build it strong enough, nobody, no HOA, no Karen, no anyone, can drive through it again.